All right, welcome back to the Primal Shift podcast. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how you can manage or live an animal-based and ancestral-focused lifestyle in a family setting. Because let's face it, living a healthy life in our modern world is relatively easy if you're the only one in the picture and if you can do whatever you want to. But things become a bit more complicated or complex when there's a partner or a spouse involved, and even more so with kids. So in this episode, I'm going to share how we've navigated some of the more challenging aspects of living an animal-based and ancestral-focused or influenced lifestyle, including nutrition, exercise, sleep, and even hormesis and stress management, because we've noticed that even at a relatively young age, among adults, but even with kids, they can get stressed. And in our modern lives, they shouldn't be stressed, but they do get stressed. And so, I want to talk about it and see and share with you how we've navigated some of those issues. I'm going to share some of the tips and tricks that have worked for us, and also some of the mistakes that we have made, especially when between the adults, and also with kids. And I'll also share the story of Kathy and I, how we started making changes and how difficult it was at times, because we were, I want to say, roughly on the same page, or at least in the same book, as far as improving our health. But we approached things at a completely different pace and speed. When I set my sights on something, I go all in, full speed, full throttle, and I bulldoze over everything that's in my way to get to my goal. Kathy is not like that. And so there were issues in the beginning when I decided, that I'm going to change my diet. And since my wife was the one cooking for us, that change impacted her directly. And so I'll share, some of those issues and how we kind of navigated that, and maybe some, general tips that you can apply if you and your partner or spouse are not exactly on the same page. But a good portion of that episode is going to be specifically around kids or families with kids, because I think you can figure it out, as adults easier, I want to say, than, with kids who get influenced, who might not feel comfortable being different or eating differently when they go to a birthday party, etc. So we're going to talk about that. But let's maybe start out with the adults. Maybe I'm going to share the story of Kathy and I. We actually began making changes to our lifestyle when we saw a documentary on Netflix. I've mentioned it several times before on the blog. I think it was Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead or something like this. And one of the core messages in that documentary was how much added sugars the average American consumes throughout the year. And it was shocking amounts. I mean, bags of sugar that we consume every year. And we did at that time too, because we, drank, sugar-laden beverages and processed foods and all kinds of things that, you shouldn't be eating if your goal is to maintain or achieve optimal health. And so we said, we're going to cut out added sugars. All foods that have added sugars go out. And we did this together. We were on the same page. We had the same goals, and we went at the same speed. And so for my wife, it was like, well, great. We removed added sugars from our lives. Now we are good. There is nothing else, we need to worry about. But I kept digging and doing more research, and then, being influenced by friends who were farther ahead in their health journey. And at some point I realized that, well, even without added sugars, there's so much in our diet that we shouldn't be eating. And so it was literally almost overnight. It was overnight. I woke up one morning and I told Kathy, I'm gonna do paleo diet. I'm gonna be done with eating, standard American diet. And she's like, well, I'm the one cooking. So if you want to do paleo, that means I have to cook now two different types of foods, one for you, with your crazy diet, and one for everyone else. I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen. And we got into an argument. I mean, a really serious argument, because I could not wrap my head around, why would you not change your diet if we know, and I assumed at this point already that we know, but I knew. I never shared any details. I never, went to her and said, hey, look at what I found. It turns out that consuming grains and legumes is not good for you because of, ABC. I just assumed she knows what I do, and that was not the case. And so that was a huge problem. And so we kind of, I got really upset, and I'm like, oh, whatever, then I'm going to continue eating, standard American diet, and we're all going to die, kind of. That was my, I was really upset, but also, realizing that I cannot push through with this because it would, there was a risk of, breaking our marriage apart, And so I did nothing for a while. I was just being kind of, a little bit upset that we didn't make any changes. And so in the meantime, Kathy actually started doing her own research because, she thought, well, if I come up with this, there's got to be something to it. And so she started researching. And then at some point she came to me and said, you know what, I think you're right. We need to change our diet. And so we adopted a paleo diet. And everything was good. We thought, great, we made that change, and now we don't have to do anything else. We thought we figured it out. Well, it didn't take long until I discovered that there is actually more, to that. There is a ketogenic diet. Apparently all carbs were bad, I thought at that point. And so I went back to Kathy and said, you know what? We have to do keto. Paleo is not enough. Keto is the thing that we need to do. And she's like, dude, we just made the change to paleo. It was a very difficult change for me. It goes against everything that I was brought up with. I mean, the regular diet in Costa Rica, where my wife's from, is based around grains, rice and legumes, beans, and all of the things we cut out. We basically removed a good chunk of her culture, dietary wise, from her life. And now, I come back and say, well, it's actually not just that. We also need to remove pretty much all carbs, from our diet. And, that includes, then again, tropical fruits, all of the things that, she grew up with. And I did too, for it, not with tropical fruits, but with, potatoes and, starchy vegetables and stuff. But again, for me, it was like I usually embrace change, and I embrace risk, and I embrace the unknown. For me, it's challenging. I like that. Not everyone is like that, and Kathy is not like that. And so that was the second, issue, or the second time in our relationship when we were like having serious arguments, because it did not occur to me that just because I know something and I figured something out and I believe in something, that someone else is on the same is at the same stage of that journey. It took me a while to get there, and I just expect now that I've reached that point, or I expected that everyone else would catch up immediately, instead of giving them the time to reach those same conclusions or similar conclusions. Again, big issue, but it didn't take long. And Kathy did her research, and she came up. I said, okay, you know what? I think keto, that's something I'd like to do as well. Fast forward, I said, well, I was a little bit smarter at that point, fortunately, but then I discovered carnivore. It's keto, might not be that great. We really, eating only meat is the thing, because plants are just not good. And so, but we approach it differently, and we did better. But I guess the bottom line here really is that, if both you and your spouse or your partner, agree on the fundamentals of, yes, we want to do better, you have to share your concerns, and you have to give him or her time to come to their own conclusions, to do the research, and to walk the walk, basically, to go through the journey at that person's pace. It's not just because you can walk very fast or sprint a certain going through research very quickly doesn't mean everyone else can or wants to, And the second thing to keep in mind is, making small improvements every day is better than no improvements at all. So there's that 1% rule, do 1% better every day. Well, guess what? In 100 days, you have done 100% better. So, there are those like me who, jump in with both feet, and do everything within a short period of time, make significant changes very quickly. But not everyone is like that, and that's fine. If your partner likes to take things slowly, chances are, if you've been on a standard American diet for most of your life, a couple of more months are not going to make a difference, likely. So give yourself and your partner the time to make those small improvements. Focus on the low-hanging fruits first. What can you do immediately? Cutting out added sugar was certainly a low-hanging fruit. Cutting out processed carbohydrates, another low-hanging fruit. You don't have to do everything perfect right away. Just do better every single day, a little bit better, and you'll be on your way. And it's much more doable. It's you're much more likely to continue down that path than going all in, getting all frustrated, and then going back to your old dietary habits or whatever the habits might be. It doesn't have to be nutrition. It was just in our case it was nutrition was the main thing. But then later, of course, we discovered xenoestrogens. We discovered all the chemicals in regular clothing. So there were more and more changes coming up, and now we've reached a point where I feel like we've tackled all the big things and we are on the same page, and anything that's coming up in the future, I think we are much more capable of handling together at the same pace, because I've also learned that we don't have to do everything overnight. We can take smaller steps, and I'm fine with that because we are already doing so many things right. Now we are optimizing, I feel like, unless maybe at some point we discover that, I don't know, living in a regular, living indoors is bad for you, then, that might be another big one. But beyond that, I think we are more like optimizing. And, one thing that I've learned and that my wife has learned as well, in dealing with me or us dealing with each other, is that, some people respond to logical reasoning and some people respond to emotional reasoning. I'm very much a logical person. For me, if it makes sense, if it's logical, I go for it. Emotions play no role in my decision making. My wife is the exact opposite. She is more on the emotional side and not so much on the logical side. So we kind of have to bring those two together by me, forgetting logic for a moment and trying to be emotional, as difficult as it is, and vice versa with my wife. And that has helped us to kind of get on the same page or pace quicker than we've done in the past. So that was just a little background story between my wife and I, between the adults. Now, of course, if you're a carnivore and your spouse is vegan, I don't know what to tell you. I would not be able to handle that, to be perfectly honest. And there's got to be some common ground. But even so, I would argue that if one is, both the carnivores as well as the vegans, I think both want the same thing. Do better for themselves, for their health, for the environment, for the animals. I think we all want the same things. We just, in those two extreme examples, we just go about completely different, have a different approach to it. I don't think the vegan one makes any sense whatsoever, but that's from my vantage point. But again, the foundation, I guess, is the same. And if you're two, grown-ups, you should be able to have a logical discussion. Logical again for me. You should have a reasonable discussion, on how to approach those things. And there might be a middle ground. I'm not saying that all plants are bad, and certainly, meat is not bad, obviously. Otherwise I wouldn't be, eating it so much. But, that's just, from an adult perspective. The rest of the podcast here, let's focus a little bit about, or on kids, because I think that's even more complicated. And of course, whenever there are kids involved, if the adults are not on the same page, it's a nightmare. So you get on the same page between the parents, if there are kids involved, before trying to influence how you want to handle your kids or the family as a whole. So let's talk about nutrition first, because that's one of the main sticking points really in many families, how to eat, not only at home, but also when you're, outside, when you're at birthday parties and things like this. And it's very obvious that, you need to set an example. It doesn't help to tell your kids how they should be eating if you're not doing it yourself. So if you're munching chips on the couch, and watching TV in the evening, how come, you can tell your kids not to eat chips? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. You need to lead by example. But even so, and we'll talk about this then with the, in the mistake section, don't assume that you're the only one setting examples, good or bad. There are many other influencing factors beyond you. And we've noticed this, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, but you need to be an example. You talk the talk and walk the walk, obviously, otherwise your kids are less likely to follow suit. The second thing that I think is incredibly important is to control your kids' environment. And what that means is, only purchase food that you want your kids to eat. If you have stuff in the pantry that they shouldn't be eating, then, why is it at home? Is it for you? Then again, why are you eating it, but your kids can't? There are obviously some exceptions like, alcohol or maybe, coffee or, things that are more detrimental to a kid's health than they are to an adult's health, even though, one could argue, alcohol and coffee is not ideal for adults either. But beyond that, don't buy stuff that you don't want your kids to eat. And we've noticed that we have significantly few arguments and whining with kids if they can have whatever we have at home. There is no discussion. No, you cannot have this or that now, or don't eat the candy. If there is no candy, if there is no processed junk food at home, and if there is only food at home that your kids can generally eat whenever they are hungry, there is no discussion. When the kids come and say, hey, I'm hungry, well, go and find food. As easy as that. Now, there is some nuance to that because, we are trying to make sure that our kids focus their meal intake on protein and not on carbohydrates. Now, I'm not saying that carbohydrates are always evil, especially the type of carbs that we have at home, like, seasonal fruits, etc., raw honey, and so on. But still, there is maybe a residual discussion point left for us, when we say, well, eat your protein first before you touch your carbs. That's one of the things we still have, not arguments about, well, with the little one more so than with the older one, but, beyond the type of food we have, whatever they find, they can generally eat. And the other thing we try to do consistently, because they keep forgetting and need refreshers, to have age-appropriate discussions about how your lifestyle choices, how your dietary choices influence how we feel and how we look. And it's not about body shaming or anything, but if the kids ask, why is this person, 3 times as big as you are, Daddy, and sitting in a cart at the grocery store, because why can't he walk, by himself? Why does he need an electric cart? I have no issues telling them, well, because that person has likely made a lot of poor dietary choices and other lifestyle choices that cost, not only the physique, but also, the consequences of not being mobile. We have those discussions, all the time, and we try to make our kids listen to their bodies and to kind of understand that how eating certain foods makes them feel. And a very good example is, with our little one. He was born prematurely, way early, and was in the NICU for almost 2 months. Fortunately, he's doing great and everything, but his digestion was funky from the get-go in comparison to to other kids, to our daughter, for example. And so even things like like bananas, he gets soft stools, and he loves bananas. I'm like, we said, Lucas, pay attention to how you feel, how your gut feels, how your poop is, when you eat bananas. Pay attention to this and make a connection. And he now understands that eating bananas, leads to, stomach ache, soft stools, etc. And so he now avoids bananas, not because we don't allow him to have them, but because he's aware that they don't make him feel great. And, having those discussions and teaching your kids to really listen to their bodies and figure out what does food do to me is important, because they can then figure out themselves that, cause and effect, and no, I cannot have certain things because it doesn't make me feel good. Eating other things makes me feel great, so I'm going to gravitate to those foods. And we have those discussions all the time because, of course, they keep forgetting, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's really, keeping that on the top of their minds is important. And we also explain them that, well, look, different people have different dietary habits, it's, and very often, when we go somewhere and, people eat candy and they drink, sugar water and stuff like that, we tell them, look, the parents probably don't know that is not good for them. They don't know. That's one of the reasons why Daddy does what he does, trying to teach other people and to share information so they can do better as well. But not everyone is on the same page. Not everyone does how we do, and that's okay. We focus on us, we listen to our bodies, and we do what we can to feel as good as we can every single day. And And, don't be afraid, if other people ask you about your or your kids' dietary habits. Very often we go somewhere and they offer, hey, do you want a fruit juice or a Gatorade or what have you? And we said, the kids are, they're 8 and 10 now, they say, no, thank you, we don't drink that or we don't eat that. And if they are asked, why is it? Or if their parents then ask us, we have no issue saying, we are doing this because, ABC, and we take it kind of as a teaching moment, to explain or to explain, why we do things a certain way and why we don't consume certain things. And, then it's up to, the other party to either say, well, I don't care, or you're crazy, or, oh, thanks for I didn't know that, but I don't care how other people take, the information. But we take it as a teaching moment. We share what we know. And if other people want to leverage that information, great. If not, that's fine with me too. I'll just sleep just as fine. In terms of especially social activities, we plan ahead and we bring our own food, for the kids. Even since they were young, they had their own lunch boxes. Every birthday party, typically when we go somewhere, it's pizza and cake and junk food, basically. And so we usually bring our own food and the kids are fine with it. In the beginning was a little bit, they are the odd ones out, but now they seem to be embracing it. They get special food. And if that means, special for them is maybe it's, instead of a regular pizza, Kathy might make them a sourdough pizza at home with, it's still not great food in terms of, it's still wheat, but at least it's fermented. It's a little bit better. We only use, it doesn't have seed oils or anything. So it's arguably better, not necessarily great, but, those few cases where we do that, is not going to derail anyone's health because of what we do on a daily basis. All of us are relatively robust, and we can handle the occasional, food that's not ideal. As same as we have regular pizza, sourdough pizza for the most part once every 2 months or so. It's not going to kill me. It's not going to do anything in a long time. Maybe the next day I might feel 90% instead of 100. I can live with that. So it's not about being strict all the time, but it's about making intentional choices, and that's what we try to teach our kids. The same goes with the macronutrients. We are not strict about, we're not on a keto diet or anything, but we make every meal focused on protein intake. Protein is the most important macronutrient as far as I'm concerned. And then energy can then come from fat or it can come from carbohydrates. There the kids have more or less the choice. We eat pretty high fat, but they also have plenty of carbs, and that's fine. And one thing that's another very important thing that really goes to it for adults and kids as well, but we feed them when they're hungry, and not when it's a set meal time. And we've noticed a huge difference in how they eat and their cravings in particular when they only eat when they're hungry and when they don't eat when they are not. Because if you think about it, how do you know when you're full if you weren't hungry to begin with before a meal? Very difficult then to figure out how much food you should be eating, right? So that was nutrition. Certainly one of the stickiest points. Next one is exercise. Kids are naturally active, physically active. If you just let them play, they usually don't choose to sit on a couch or sit on a chair, all day like adults do, maybe because of a job or what have you. They are naturally active, and the best thing you can do is not be in their way and let them be active. And that doesn't mean you have to sign them up for 1,000 different activities. Just let them be outside in nature is usually enough. They don't, need any formal sport. It doesn't hurt, to be part of a team or whatever. But if they play, outside, with, in our case, with the chickens or with the rabbits or what have you, that's good enough. It's physically active. All it matters. It doesn't really matter, what the type of activity naturally is. And we have noticed in particular, if you want to find what is it that I can do that's not, a formal sport or whatever, we have noticed that all kids are naturally attracted to water, and that could be a garden hose. It could be a river or a stream. any body of water, any type of water, and they go nuts with it. They like that. They like getting wet and playing in water, etc. So whenever we have a chance, we go to a stream, we let them, play in a river or whatever. We let them play with the garden hose. Heck, sometimes we just turn on the sprinkler in the backyard and let them run around and have fun, with the dog. And, it doesn't cost you anything, or at least not much. A little bit of water, but that's it. The other day we noticed, we have like this 300-gallon stock tank for our geese, so they can bathe in and swim in a little bit. And they started playing in there, in the dirt water at the end of the day, where the geese pooped in already for a couple of days. But they had a blast just playing with that water. They built like little floats, and were playing in there with the geese, and it was all good fun. And it's cheap, doesn't cost anything, and you don't need to overschedule, with a ton of activities. So that's, exercise, but any type of exercise, if you're not in the way of your kids, it's usually all you need to do to allow them to be active. Depending on the age, of course. Sleep is another one that we've noticed, even with our 10-year-old, not so much the 8-year-old. He is a solid sleeper. He's from the get-go, he has never had any issues sleeping. The older one, on the other hand, she seems to be falling asleep later than we would like her to fall asleep. And then, of course, she needs to sleep longer in the morning. And that was a huge issue for a long time while she was still in school, because, during school, during the school year, she had to get up at 6:15 in the morning. And that means if we want her to sleep 10, 11 hours, whatever it was at the time that she needed, it was just a simple math, or a numbers game to calculate back to when she has to fall asleep. So she would get, her hours. But she wasn't, necessarily tired at the time, but then she was tired in the morning, and she never quite, adjusted. And it was really one of the main reasons, believe it or not, why we decided to take our kids out of school. Besides the educational aspect of, not us not agreeing with the curriculum and how they, were taught and what they were taught, etc. But it was really the sleep, because we said it doesn't make sense to send our kids to bed before the sun is down, just so we can get them up at 6 in the morning, for them to go to school. And so what we did is basically we tried to line up their sleep schedule more with, the sunlight, get up when the sun comes out and go to bed when the sun goes down, kind of, depending on the time of the year. But during that process, while we, made those changes, we realized very dramatically that sun exposure had a dramatic impact on their sleep, specifically on the older one. So what that means is, getting them out into sunlight in the morning already and throughout the day means they would fall asleep quicker at an earlier time and sleep better than if they were playing inside or, spending their time inside for most of the day. So sun exposure, incredibly important. And that's nothing new. And I talked about this in previous episodes and on the blog already. Sunlight has a direct impact on the circadian rhythm. And that applies to kids as well as to adults. So finding time during the day to be outside in the morning, there is a lot of scientific evidence that shows that getting the early morning sunlight directly into your eyes and, the sunset and then, the harsh UV light during the day has a significant impact on the circadian rhythm. So getting the kids out exposed to light, without wearing sunscreen and wearing sunglasses and all of those things, just getting them out into the sun has a dramatic impact on their sleep. And the same goes obviously with physical activity. On days where they are very physically active, they get tired quicker and sleep better. No surprise, it's the same that applies to adults as well. If I don't move in a day, then I have much more energy built up that I have not used, probably because I'm still eating the same and I have extra energy and I'm not as sleepy in the evening. As far as food is concerned, no super high carb foods before bedtime. Again, same applies to adults as well, but carbohydrates are energy, are quick sources of energy. You don't necessarily want to fuel up with a lot of energy right before going to bed. And I've already, mentioned school. It's not everyone can do it. I understand. But taking them out of school, taking them out of basically a fixed schedule where they have to get up at a certain time in the morning. In most cases for kids, it's because of school. But whatever the case might be, letting them sleep until they wake up. And I'm not talking about sleeping in until noon, because they played video games all night. That's not what I mean. Assuming, and there is obviously no video games or no TV or anything, no electronics in their bedroom to start with, But assuming they go to bed at a regular time, we try to let them sleep until they wake up naturally, because that means they have gotten enough sleep. Starting with sleep deprivation already at an early age is a recipe for disaster, for a recipe for poor mental health, for poor physical health, and everything that comes with it. So that was sleep, and the sleep of our kids has dramatically improved ever since we go, by the sun, pretty much, and we go to bed when it's dark and we get up when it's light. And obviously, during summer, the sun is out for much longer. So we, still, they might get up already after sunset, after sunrise, but they go to bed when it's dark. And we try to stick to that as good as we can. Now, in terms of hormesis, that might sound, odd to you, because why do we have to worry about, hormetic stressors with kids? But we have noticed that the earlier you allow your kids to expose themselves, not by you pushing them, but by allowing them to get into quote unquote stressful situations. And by stressful, I mean, not stress about, social media or what, the other kids said about their clothing or how they eat or whatever, but hormetic stressors like heat exposure, cold exposure. Even fasting, is a very good way of making them more resilient from an early age. And so, for example, we encourage them or ask them, hey, do you want to go into the sauna? And they've realized that, especially, when they get like the sniffles or when they feel like not great and they go into the sun or into the sauna, basically exposing them to heat, it makes them feel better, And just the other day, Lucas, it seems like right now there's something going around again. A lot of people are sick, and Lucas started with a congested nose and a sore throat, and I saw him, without a shirt in the sun, and he's like, and I came down and he said, when I don't feel good, I really like the sun. And I'm like, good for you. You're listening to your body and you know what's good for you. And then he, went into the sauna, and our older one too. And they just feel better after it. And so, I'm not going to, push them into a cold plunge, obviously, at that age, but, letting them experience, cold temperatures, be it, in winter or be it, when we, play the stream and they get in and they get all cold, that's all perfectly fine. They're not going to get sick. They're going to get more resilient and better. And another hormetic stressor that we not really intentionally, but coincidentally discovered was fasting. And that happened because we said, on certain days, we're not going to have a set breakfast time. We eat when we feel hungry. And so instead of us offering them food, they get up, usually they play, and they're busy and, do their thing. So instead of saying, hey, kids, come, breakfast is ready, we just said, let's not do anything. Let's wait until they come to us and said they're hungry. And that we did that a couple of times, and that turned into, instead of having breakfast at like 6:15 in the morning while they were at school or while they were still in school, they sometimes now have breakfast at 10, 11, 12. Sometimes, we break our fast, Kathy and I, at noon. And you're like, Isabella, have you eaten yet? You're like, no, but I'm now kind of feel hungry too, so I'll eat with you, And she had not had any food until the dinner the day before. It's not because we make them fast or we push them to not eat. We just allow them to not eat when they are not hungry and then start eating when they actually feel hungry. And you'll be surprised, it's perfectly normal for humans to not eat for 16 hours or so, 14 hours if you don't feel hungry. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's a great hormetic stressor, I think, that makes them more resilient and more metabolically flexible. In terms of stress management, that's a challenging one. That's a very important one on at the same time, because we've noticed that kids at various ages are already exposed to chronic stress, and that should not be the case. The only thing kids should have to worry about is play, and learn through playing, discovering stuff, learning things, but not be stressed with things that we put on their plate. And one of the main things that we've seen around us, but also in our family, was scheduling, and that starts with school, If they go to school all day and they come back and then they have after school activities or then they have to do homework, it's already starts at such an early age where I'm like, it's absolutely ridiculous that they have to worry about schedules and to-dos and meetings and all kind of things. It's ridiculous, and it induces stress, and it's not inducive or not conducive to optimal mental and physical health, and you want to protect them from that stress for as long as you can, because at some point they're going to be exposed to that if they want to or not, if they continue living in our modern world. And I think, it's probably going to get even worse for future generations than it has been for us, if history is any indication. And so we try to intentionally not overschedule them. And there was one recent example where, our daughter loves gymnastics, and she did it for a while. She was fairly good. She was really good. And so she kept advancing, and they have like different levels. And the higher you get up, the more you train, obviously, the more competitions you have, etc. And because, during school year, most kids go to school, they had most of those practices in the evening. And so when she was about to advance to the next level, she would come back from practice at like 8:30 at night. That's when Kathy and I go to bed, and I'm like, we're not going to do this. We're not going to negatively impact her sleep schedule because of a sport that is, it's optional. It's great that she likes it. It's a great sport, per se, gymnastics. I'm nothing against it, but it's not more important than sleep. And it's certainly not important enough to overschedule her with, now it's X times a week, practice and then competitions. And then you have to be there and you have to do this. I'm like, no, not at 10 years, at 9 years, absolutely not. And so, we are very careful with scheduling things for them. If they want to do a sport, of course we support it, but then we do, one thing a week. We're not going to do this and this and this and this. And then they have zero free time where they, want to explore and do the things that they really want to do and not the things that, we want them to do. And, kids learn through play. That's, first and foremost. And I strongly believe that if you just let them play and let them do their thing, they learn, they advance, and there is no need to overschedule them, And so that was another reason why we decided to homeschool or really unschool. We don't have a curriculum. We don't have a schedule, they learn through playing. And they do. If you watch them, they learn, and our kids are significantly smarter and more advanced that Kathy and I ever were. So if they, seeing what we are seeing, we see no need to have any fixed schedule or whatever. And I also don't believe in overscheduling your kids to keep them out of trouble, keeping them so busy that they don't have time to get in trouble. I think getting in trouble is a product of the wrong environment and wrong values and wrong leadership as parents, and not necessarily because they have nothing better to do, So here, some of the, I guess, to wrap the whole episode up, a couple of tips and tricks that have worked for us, and maybe some of the mistakes that we've made that we should be doing differently. And the first one, that's actually one of the favorites of my wife, is to remember that we are as adults, the frontal lobe of our kids, because their brain hasn't developed yet. And that, obviously is a little bit age dependent, but even, someone who is in the early 20s or late teens or whatever, their brain hasn't fully matured yet. And especially in our case with an 8 and a 10-year-old, we are their frontal lobe. Their logical reasoning is not the same as ours, and they are much more emotional, and sometimes have trouble connecting the emotional side with the logical side to have proper reasoning. I still have those issues because I'm mostly logical and not so much emotional. And so that's something, we should not forget whenever there is issues, whenever we say, well, we go to a birthday party and they start crying because they cannot have the cake. For them, they don't know what we know. And so we have to take that into account and approach it from an emotional perspective first and foremost before we can start reasoning with them logically. The other thing is, I think that's one of the most important things, is to provide an environment that fosters freedom on the one hand and their well-being on the other hand, meaning that I don't want to, tell them exactly what they have to and can eat every single day, but I want to provide them with an environment where they can choose, and whatever their choice is, it's a good choice, but that means, controlling their environment. And I'm not saying this in the sense of, you don't have to be like North Korea, where everything, they can and cannot do and can say and cannot say is predetermined and controlled by someone, like by us, by the parents. But by providing them with an environment where it's difficult to make poor choices, and if they get used to making proper choices while still exercising their freedom, I think you have a recipe for less friction than otherwise. And friction is really, I think, the main thing, when nobody wants to argue with their kids every single day. And so making it as frictionless as possible. And that, sometimes that might mean, hard choices. Like, for example, if it turns out that there is a constant issue about, watching TV, then I'm radical enough to remove the TV. If there is no TV, there is no discussion, whether or not they can watch and what they can watch and when they can watch and for how long. It's very simple, no TV, and the problem is solved. Of course, you need to figure out how far you want to get and how much argument you can sustain without going insane, to keep everything moving. I mean, in our case, we have a TV. The TV is not a big issue, fortunately, but we also have iPads where, that the kids use to do math and to do certain things that are educational. But of course, when you offer an iPad, when there is an iPad to be used, then you might get into an argument about why they cannot, why screen time is limited despite all the educational stuff. And so you need to figure out for yourself how much you want to put up with, and if it would just be easier to remove the problem or the source of the problem altogether. And then every so often, we have discussions as a family where we kind of rehash why we do what we do. And the older the kids get, the more they understand. Like our, older one, she now, when she goes somewhere, she reads the nutrition label, she turns the product around. And the other day she said, look at how many ingredients, and many of those, I don't even know what they mean. So that must be crap food, right, Daddy? And I'm like, that's the spirit. She is now old enough to understand what we look for and why that is. And our 8-year-old, he is more like, all over the place. He doesn't care. He's more like, he's more easier to influence by us. But the older they get, the more they make those decisions, and the better the foundation you set up, the better decisions they will make. And then last but not least, and that's an important one, and we've noticed this over and over again, that don't assume your kids will follow your lead, even if you're doing all the right things and aren't influenced by others, be it schools, clubs, TV, or even books. And I'm saying this because, I run around without a shirt a lot during the day, sometimes even without pants. Our kids are not like that. It took some serious effort to encourage them to go outside and take their shirt off, to expose their naked skin to sunlight. I'm not saying, running around completely naked, but, taking off your shirt, taking off your shoes, that was another thing where I'm like, I'm barefoot all the time, but our kids not. And then the other day we noticed our daughter, rolling her eyes when Kathy said something. And I'm like, where do you have eye rolling from? Because we don't roll our eyes, And turned out, it was from a TV show, where apparently, those kids or teenagers were rolling eyes, and she picked it up from there. And then in another occasion, and we thought, okay, it's TV, we all know TV, you don't learn anything good from TV, we can limit that, etc. But then the other day, there was something, and I don't remember exactly what the behavior was, but it was learned, they learned it from reading, from a book. So even, books that we generally encourage, we encourage them to read as much as possible. They read a lot. They have a lot of books. We go to the library a lot, but even in books, you kind of want to be careful and shape, what they get exposed to. And try to avoid things that you don't want them to be exposed to, and very often you're not the coolest person, in their environment. It might be friends, it might be, someone else, it might be a TV character or a character in the book. It doesn't really matter. But don't assume that just because you do the right thing that your kids will follow suit. That's not often the case, or not always the case. Hopefully it is often the case, but not always. And so that's also another important thing to keep in mind. Obviously talk the talk, walk the walk, but control the environment and make sure that there is no external influence that goes counter of what you're trying to teach. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. I hope there were some things in there that you could learn from, that you could apply to your own, family, to your own family setting, to kind of improve the way you eat, the way you sleep, the way you manage stress, the way you exercise without causing a lot of friction. Because the more frictionless it is, the more longevity your strategy will have, and the better it is for everyone. At the end of the day, doing something that everyone hates is not sustainable. You're not going to be doing it for long. So you need to find a way to make it sustainable, to make it fun, to make it joyful, to have everyone embrace what you're doing. And so you can not only improve your health, but also stay mentally sane and happy at the end of the day, because that's what really matters. You want to be happy, you want to be joyful, and with that, we're going to wrap it up. If you like this episode, like it, share it, follow, subscribe. I appreciate it. Until the next one.